My parents gave my sister a $240,000 trust fund. And for me, they left nothing but an empty chair at the table. I thought I'd spend my life carrying that betrayal, but fate had other plans. My sister's wedding, the event they spent years building up, crumbled into ruins right before their eyes. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I can still remember the exact moment the truth settled in my bones. It wasn't gradual, not something I pieced together over time. No, it hit me like a slap, quick, sharp, and humiliating. I had always known my parents favored my sister, Emily, but that night, when I learned she had been gifted a trust worth $240,000, while I got nothing, it was as if the years of small slights suddenly became undeniable proof. We were gathered at a restaurant, a place my parents only reserved for what they called special occasions. My 18th birthday. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were going to celebrate me for once. There was a part of me, a hopeful little girl still clinging inside, that believed I'd finally be seen. The evening began with forced smiles and the usual script. Emily talking about her college plans, her internships, her bright future. My parents nodding, encouraging, hanging onto her every word. I laughed when appropriate, pushed my food around my plate, and tried not to notice how invisible I felt. Then my father raised his glass. He cleared his throat the way he always did before making an announcement. My heart skipped. I thought, this is it. They're finally going to say something about me, about my hard work, about my birthday, about anything. But instead, his words landed like stones in my stomach. He announced, with pride, that Emily's trust fund had just matured. $240,000, safely tucked away for her future. He spoke of it like it was an investment in greatness, a promise fulfilled. The table erupted in applause. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, overcome with emotion. And me? I sat frozen, waiting. Surely, there had to be something for me too. Even if it wasn't that much. Even if it was just a token. Some acknowledgement that I also mattered. I finally asked, my voice catching a little. And, what about me? The pause was suffocating. My father didn't even look at me. My mother gave me the kind of pitying smile you'd offer a child who asked a question you didn't want to answer in front of company. Then, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world, she said, "We didn't think you'd need one. Honey, you're resourceful. You'll find your own way." The table went back to laughing, clinking glasses, celebrating Emily. I sat there, staring at the empty chair beside me, a seat meant for the guest who never showed up. And in that moment, it struck me. That chair was me. Empty, replaceable, always present but never truly seen. I forced myself to smile through the rest of the evening, to eat the cake, to nod at Emily's gloating remarks. But inside, something broke. It was more than anger. It was a quiet kind of devastation. The realization that the people who should have been my safety net had not only abandoned me, they had chosen to cut me out entirely. I left that dinner carrying not just the sting of betrayal, but a wound that would shape every interaction that followed. It was the moment I knew, deep down, that Emily's shine would always come at the cost of my shadow. And I couldn't help but wonder, how long could this imbalance last before something finally gave way? After that night, I began seeing my life through a sharper lens. Looking back, the signs had always been there, but I'd brushed them off as normal family dynamics. It wasn't until the trust fund revelation that I realized the imbalance wasn't accidental. It was intentional, woven into every fiber of our family life. Let me paint the picture for you. I grew up in a modest, middle-class home. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably. At least, that's what I thought. My parents, in their own words, did their best. And maybe they did. But their best always seemed to be reserved for Emily. Emily was the golden child. Through and through, she was the kind of daughter parents showed off in Christmas letters, straight A's, piano recitals, cheer captain, you name it. But what those letters never mentioned was how she got there. She was catered to, protected, and praised, even when she barely lifted a finger. If Emily got a B, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got an A, it was expected and brushed aside. And then there was me. I wasn't a troublemaker, not by any means. I worked hard, kept my head down, and did what I could to earn approval. But I quickly learned that no matter what I achieved, it would never measure up to Emily's potential. My parents had this way of turning every comparison into a lecture. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the chorus of my childhood. At birthdays, Emily received jewelry, gadgets, designer clothes. My gifts were more practical: socks, notebooks, sometimes a gift card if I was lucky. At Christmas, she'd unwrap mountains of carefully chosen presents while I got a sweater one size too small. My parents would laugh it off, saying, "Well, you can grow into it." Even in family photos, the favoritism was obvious. Emily always in the center, my parents flanking her proudly. Me, tucked on the side, half cut out of the frame, like an afterthought. The deeper I think about it, the more I realize my parents weren't just showing preference. They were building Emily's pedestal brick by brick, while quietly dismantling mine. And the saddest part, for years, I accepted it. I told myself that maybe it was my fault, that maybe if I were more like her, I'd be loved in the same way. But Emily, she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't oblivious. She thrived on it. She'd flaunt her advantages like a queen parading her jewels. When she got her first car, a shiny, brand new convertible gifted on her 16th birthday, she drove me to school the next morning just so she could sneer, "Don't get crumbs on the seats. This is worth more than anything you'll ever own." Meanwhile, I saved up for months to buy a beat-up second-hand car that barely made it down the block. Without groaning. My parents' reaction? Be grateful you even have one. And yet, for all her shine, Emily had an edge. She was entitled, manipulative, the kind of person who could smile sweetly to your face while twisting the knife behind your back. She loved being adored, but she loved even more the power she held over me. To her, I was the built-in audience, the little sister who made her look brighter by comparison. My parents enabled it every step of the way. If I complained, they accused me of jealousy. If Emily was cruel, they excused it as sibling rivalry. The message was clear. I was not meant to challenge her. I was meant to orbit around her, quietly and without fuss. And yet, even with all this, there was a fragile sense of normal in our household. We had dinners together, went on vacations, and played the part of a picture-perfect family. To outsiders, we looked stable, maybe even enviable. But beneath that glossy exterior was a hierarchy as clear as day. Emily at the top, my parents at her side, and me, lingering in the shadows, filling the empty chair. It was an unspoken arrangement, one I tolerated because I didn't think I had another choice. But after the trust fund dinner, the cracks in that arrangement widened. The betrayal gave me clarity, and once you've seen the truth, You can't unsee it. What I didn't know then was that the pedestal they built for Emily would one day become her downfall. All that favoritism, all that blind devotion. It was a house of cards. And it only took one well-placed truth to make it collapse. But that moment was still far off. For now, I was still the quiet daughter, the forgotten one, and the worst was yet to come. For years, I swallowed the bitterness like medicine, convincing myself it was just the way things were. But there's always a breaking point. One moment that burns so deep into your memory that you know life will never feel the same. Afterward, for me, that moment came on my 18th birthday. Now, you might think turning 18 should feel liberating, almost ceremonial. You're suddenly considered an adult, standing on the edge of your future. That's how I thought it would feel. I expected, hoped, that my parents would finally see me as someone worthy of acknowledgement, maybe even of investment. Instead, it became the night I realized how disposable I was in their eyes. The dinner itself was carefully staged. We went to an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and candles flickering in crystal holders. My parents acted like it was all for me, smiling politely as we were led to a corner booth. For a fleeting moment, I believed them. I thought, this is my night. They're finally going to celebrate me the way they always celebrate Emily. I was wrong. The first red flag came when the conversation immediately shifted to Emily's upcoming college semester. My birthday, the reason we were all there, seemed to fade into the background. My mother leaned across the table, her voice brimming with pride, as she listed Emily's accomplishments for the waiter who didn't even ask. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn in the spotlight, but it never came. Then my father raised his glass, his tone swelling with formality, like a man about to deliver a toast at a wedding. My chest tightened with anticipation. Surely this was it, a proud speech about me entering adulthood, maybe even a small surprise gift. Instead, his words felt like daggers. He announced that Emily's trust fund had officially matured. $240,000. He spoke of it with reverence, like it was some divine reward for her brilliance and hard work. My mother's eyes glistened with tears, and Emily beamed as if she were being crowned queen of the evening. The applause that followed, yes, actual applause from distant relatives invited to dinner, rang in my ears. My heart pounded. I waited for him to say something more, something about me, anything. But the silence was deafening, and I finally forced the words out, my voice barely above a whisper. And what about me? The table froze. My mother looked at me like I'd just said something inappropriate. My father cleared his throat but didn't meet my eyes. Then, in the softest, most dismissive tone, my mother said, "We didn't think you'd need one. Sweetheart, you're independent. You'll manage." That was it. That was their explanation for why my sister deserved nearly $250,000. And I got nothing but a pat on the head. I remember staring at the empty chair across from me, the one they'd reserved for a family friend who never showed up. It was a chair meant to be filled, but it wasn't. And in that moment, I felt like that chair, present, but invisible, always waiting, always excluded. The rest of the night blurred into noise. Laughter, clinking glasses, Emily's smug grin. I smiled when expected, but inside, something hardened. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was realization, a sharp, clear understanding that my parents hadn't just overlooked me. They had decided I wasn't worth investing in at all. That was the line being crossed. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about what the money represented. Faith, security, and belief in my future. They had given all of that to Emily, and they had left me with scraps. I left the restaurant that night with a new weight pressing on my chest. I knew things would never go back to the way they were. Something in me had shifted, and though I didn't know it yet, that betrayal would set the stage for everything that followed. Because once someone shows you your worth in their eyes, you can't forget it. And I would never forget that empty chair, or the cruel clarity it brought. After that night, something inside me went quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from peace. It was the silence of survival. I stopped expecting fairness, stopped hoping for some sudden shift in my parents' hearts. Instead, I watched. I listened. And with each passing day, I saw the gap between my life and Emily's widen like a canyon. Emily thrived in the glow of her trust fund. She wielded it like a weapon, reminding me at every opportunity how secure her future was compared to mine. "Don't stress about bills," she'd say, with a smile that was anything but kind. "Not everyone has a cushion like I do." Then she'd laugh, as if my struggle was entertainment. My parents joined in her little games, though they did it with the veneer of concern. They'd ask me if I needed help, but the kind of help they offered was insulting. "Maybe Emily can buy you a few groceries," my mother once suggested, as if I should bow down in gratitude to my younger sister. It was around this time that Emily got engaged. Her fiancé, Daniel, was from a wealthy family, and suddenly the wedding became the new obsession in my parents' lives. Every conversation, every family gathering, revolved around it. Flowers, venues, guest lists. It consumed them, and with that obsession came a new demand: my contribution. One evening, I stopped by my parents' house for dinner. Halfway through the meal, my father set down his fork and said, "Now, about Emily's wedding. We're all pitching in. It's a family celebration." I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard correctly. I was barely making rent at the time, juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. And yet, here they were, asking me to fund the wedding of the sister who had everything. "I can't afford that," I said firmly, my mother's face pinched in disappointment. "It's not about what you can afford. It's about showing support for your sister." Emily leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Honestly, it's embarrassing that you'd even question it. No wonder they didn't set up a trust for you. You're so ungrateful." Her words landed like a slap, but worse than the insult was the way my parents nodded in agreement, as if her cruelty was wisdom. That was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Emily's demands grew bolder. She called me one evening, her tone brisk and entitled, and informed me that I'd be taking unpaid time off work to help with wedding preparations. "It's not optional," she said. "Family helps family." When I pushed back, she sneered. "It's not like you have anything better to do. And don't even think about showing up at the wedding without a proper gift. People will notice." Her arrogance was staggering. And yet, my parents echoed her demands. They told me I needed to step up, that this was my chance to prove I cared about family. Each interaction chipped away at my patience. I found myself rehearsing responses in my head, imagining what I wanted to say versus what I actually said. Outwardly, I kept my voice calm, measured, but inside, frustration burned hotter with every passing day. The final insult came in the form of an envelope. Inside was a wedding roll assignment, something Emily had put together for all the close family members. Her fiancé's brothers were groomsmen. Her friends were bridesmaids. My parents were listed as honored hosts. And me? I was labeled a seat filler, someone to move around and keep chairs from looking empty if guests had to step away. When I read those words, I felt the room tilt. It wasn't just cruel. It was humiliating by design. Emily wanted me small, invisible, and laughable in front of everyone who mattered to her. And the worst part, my parents defended it. They told me to be grateful that Emily included me at all. That was the moment I realized the situation wasn't just unbearable. It was escalating into something that could destroy me if I let it continue. Emily and my parents had crossed lines before, but now they were building an entire celebration on my humiliation. And whether they knew it or not, they were planting the seeds of their own downfall. Because deep down, I began to understand something. People who build their lives on cruelty always leave cracks. And those cracks, if you know where to look, can be widened into an earthquake. The envelope with the word seat filler should have been laughable if it hadn't been so devastating. I sat at my kitchen table with that piece of paper in my hands, staring at the insult written in neat, deliberate letters. My throat tightened, but not from tears, from the sheer weight of humiliation pressing down on me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. Maybe it's just a placeholder until they think of something else. But the truth was clear. Emily had chosen this deliberately. She wanted me sidelined, not just privately but publicly, in front of all the people who mattered to her. The more I thought about it, the more the memories stacked on top of each other like bricks. The dinners where I was invisible, the birthdays where my gifts were practical leftovers, the family photos where I was half cut off, the trust fund that was never mine. And now this, a role so beneath me that even the guests' coats would have more dignity than I did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying conversations in my head. My mother's patronizing smile, my father's proud speeches about Emily, my sister's smirk when she mocked me. A cold knot sat heavy in my stomach, growing tighter each time I pictured myself standing at that wedding, silently shifting from seat to seat like a background prop. The following weekend, I confronted my parents. I needed to hear them say it, that this was all okay with them. Maybe a part of me still hoped they'd back me up. For once in my life, I sat across from them in their living room. The wedding binder spread out on the coffee table, pages marked with sticky notes in Emily's handwriting. "Do you really think it's fair?" I asked. "That Emily assigned me as a seat filler? Do you honestly think that's what I deserve after everything?" My father didn't even look up from the binder. "It's her wedding. She can arrange it how she wants," my mother added, with that same tired tone she always used to dismiss me. "Don't make this about you. You should be grateful she thought to include you at all." Grateful. That word stung worse than any insult. They wanted me to be grateful for scraps, for humiliation dressed as charity. I felt something shift inside me then. It wasn't rage. Not exactly. Rage flares up and burns out quickly. This was colder, steadier. A decision, more than an emotion. I realized in that moment that I could never win their approval. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, they would always see me as less. And if I kept playing along, if I kept swallowing their cruelty, I'd become exactly what they wanted me to be. Invisible. But I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't weak. That was the breaking point. It was the moment I stopped asking myself, why don't they love me the same? And started asking, what can I do with the truth I already know? Because the truth was this. My family had built a glittering pedestal for Emily, polished with lies, favoritism, and stolen resources. But pedestals are fragile. They crack under the weight of arrogance. And for the first time, I began to see the cracks. As I walked out of that house, I made a silent vow. I would not play the role they assigned me. I would not be their filler, their afterthought, their shadow. If they wanted to humiliate me at that wedding, then they were going to learn that humiliation cuts both ways. What I didn't yet know was how I'd do it, but I knew this much. I was done being their silent victim. Something inside me had snapped, and there would be no going back. Once I made that vow to myself, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't sure yet how I would make good on it, but the decision alone gave me strength. For the first time in years, I stopped reacting to Emily and my parents, and I started thinking ahead. The opportunity came from a place I hadn't expected. My grandmother. My grandmother had passed away years earlier, but I'd always felt closest to her. Unlike my parents, she never played favorites. She was gentle, thoughtful, and had a way of making me feel seen, even in small moments. A wear-upon scarf, a handwritten note, a quiet word of encouragement. After she died, I assumed whatever she had left behind had gone straight into the same vault of favoritism that Emily always benefited from. One afternoon, months before the wedding, I was running errands when I saw a name I recognized on a building downtown, the law office that had handled my grandmother's estate. Something tugged at me. On impulse, I went inside. I explained who I was and asked if there was any paperwork related to my grandmother still on file. The receptionist disappeared for a few minutes, then returned with a man I hadn't met before, the attorney who had managed my grandmother's will. He invited me into his office, and we spoke for nearly an hour. I told him, cautiously, about my parents' favoritism and how they had always insisted Emily was the only one with a trust fund. His expression grew thoughtful, almost troubled. Finally, he opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. My heart thudded as he placed it on the desk and opened it. There, in black and white, was proof that my grandmother had left both Emily and me an inheritance, equal shares, around $120,000 each. I felt dizzy. I'd been told my whole life there was nothing for me, that my independence was my only asset. Yet here it was. My grandmother had believed in me enough to ensure my future, but my parents had decided otherwise. The attorney explained that shortly after my grandmother's passing, my parents had moved my share into Emily's trust fund. It wasn't illegal at the time, not technically, because of how the paperwork had been structured, but it was undeniably dishonest. He leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "If you wanted to, you could challenge this. I still have all the documentation." I sat there, stunned, the reality settling over me like a cloak. My parents hadn't just overlooked me. They had stolen from me. They had erased my grandmother's last gesture of love, funneled it into Emily's lap, and then told me to be grateful for crumbs. I walked out of that office with copies of the documents tucked into an envelope. My hands trembled as I held it, but my mind was clear. This wasn't just leverage. It was justice waiting to be unleashed. For weeks, I kept the papers hidden in my apartment, tucked away in a drawer. I studied them over and over, memorizing every clause, every date, every signature. Each time I read them, my resolve hardened. Emily's wedding loomed closer, growing bigger and more extravagant by the day. My parents bragged constantly about the venue, the catering, the guest list filled with influential people. They were pouring everything into this event, desperate to present Emily as their crowning achievement to the world. And that's when it hit me. If they wanted to build a monument to Emily's success, I would let them. I would let them gather all the people they wanted to impress, all the friends, all the in-laws, all the community figures. I would let them create the perfect stage, and then, at the very height of their pride, I would reveal the truth. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about timing, about making sure the revelation carried the weight of an earthquake. My parents thought they had written me out of the family legacy, reduced me to nothing but a seat filler at the grandest moment of Emily's life. But they had overlooked one thing: the documents in my possession. Those papers were my weapon, not forged, not fabricated, but the undeniable truth. A truth they could not spin, deny, or bury once it was in the open. Every insult, every dismissal, every humiliation I had endured built up to this. The cracks in their carefully constructed pedestal were ready to split wide open, and I would be the one to deliver the final blow. The day of Emily's wedding arrived draped in the kind of grandeur my parents had always dreamed of. White roses lined the aisle, crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and every detail screamed wealth and prestige. To anyone else, it might have looked like a fairy tale, but to me, it looked like a stage, and I knew exactly what role I was going to play. I arrived early, envelope in hand, the documents folded neatly inside. My heart raced, but my face was calm. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times in my mind that it felt almost inevitable. The trick was patience. I couldn't strike too soon. The timing had to be perfect. During the ceremony itself, I said nothing. I watched Emily glide down the aisle in her designer gown, her chin tilted just a little too high, her smile polished and proud. My parents sat in the front row, beaming like royalty. Guests whispered about how stunning everything was, how lucky Daniel was to be marrying into such a respectable family. I let them have their moment, because I knew what was coming. The reception was held in a massive ballroom, tables draped in silk, glasses filled with champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. There was laughter, music, dancing. Emily was radiant, basking in the glow of admiration, while my parents floated from table to table, shaking hands and boasting about their successful daughter. I waited. I sipped water. I kept to myself, watching the clock. Finally, the moment arrived. My father took the microphone. He tapped it gently, drawing the crowd's attention, and launched into a speech he had clearly rehearsed for weeks. He spoke of Emily's brilliance, her beauty, her bright future. He praised Daniel for being wise enough to marry her. He described the years of sacrifice he and my mother had made to give Emily everything she needed to succeed. His voice swelled with pride, and the crowd applauded at all the right places. And then, just as he lifted his glass to toast the couple, I stood. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to carry across the room. Dozens of heads turned. My father froze, glass halfway to his lips. Emily's smile faltered. Just for a moment. I walked forward, envelope in hand, and took the microphone. My palms tingled, but I didn't waver. "I need to say something," I began. "It won't take long, but it's important. Especially tonight." The room quieted. All eyes were on me. I looked directly at my parents. "You've spent this entire evening praising Emily, talking about the sacrifices you made for her, the trust fund you set up, the foundation you built for her future." I paused, scanning the room. "What none of you know is that everything they gave her, they stole from me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Emily's eyes widened in shock. I pulled the documents from the envelope and held them up. "When my grandmother passed away, she left her estate split equally between Emily and me, around 120,000 each. But my parents decided I wasn't worthy. They funneled my share into Emily's trust and then told me I got nothing. They lied to me. 4 years. The silence was heavy, broken only by whispers spreading like wildfire. "These aren't accusations," I continued, my voice firm. These are legal documents, notarized, with signatures. I have every page. I've carried this truth for months, and I decided tonight was the night you all deserved to hear it. Because this wedding, this display of wealth and status, it's built on theft, on betrayal. I set the envelope on the table in front of me. Don't take my word for it. The proof is right here. A murmur rose in the crowd, sharp and uncomfortable. I could see Daniel's parents exchanging looks, their faces hardening with suspicion. Daniel himself shifted uneasily beside Emily, who was now red-faced, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father tried to stand, tried to regain control of the room, but his voice cracked when he spoke. This is not the time. I cut him off, calmly but firmly. No, Dad, this is exactly the time. Because for once, everyone gets to see what I've lived with my whole life. I stepped back, letting the silence settle. My hands no longer shook. For the first time, I felt steady, powerful, unshakably certain. The damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The silence that followed my words was deafening. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed frozen, like time itself had stopped. Guests sat stiffly in their chairs, eyes darting between me, Emily, and my parents. The glow of champagne and chandeliers suddenly felt harsh, unforgiving, like a spotlight exposing every crack in the carefully polished facade my family had built. Then came the eruption. Emily shot to her feet, her face blotchy red, her voice trembling with rage. "She's lying," she shouted, pointing at me as if she could banish the truth with sheer force of will. "She's always been jealous of me. She's making this up to ruin my wedding." But even as she said it, her voice cracked. There was no conviction behind her words, only desperation. The guests weren't convinced. They turned toward me, then back at her, waiting. That's when I gestured toward the envelope sitting on the table. "If you think I'm lying, go ahead. Open it. Read it for yourself. Every signature, every date, every transfer. It's all there." A man near the front, Daniel's father, reached for the papers. Emily gasped, lunging forward as if to stop him. But it was too late. He flipped through the documents, his face growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up, his voice cold and sharp. "Emily, is this true?" Emily's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at my parents, silently begging them to save her. My mother stood, trembling, her voice breaking. We did what we thought was best. We wanted to protect the money, to make sure it didn't go to waste." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Someone whispered, "They stole from their own daughter." Another muttered, "How could they do that?" Daniel's parents looked horrified, their perfectly polite smiles gone. Daniel himself stepped back from Emily, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "You knew about this?" he asked her, his voice low but audible in the hush of the room. Emily's eyes darted wildly. I didn't know the details, but the look on her face betrayed her. She knew. She had always known. My father tried to step in, his voice booming but brittle. "This is a family matter. It's none of your concern." But it was too late. The illusion had shattered. Their friends, their community, Daniel's entire family. Everyone now saw them for what they really were. Thieves and liars, who had built Emily's pedestal on stolen ground. The confrontation spiraled. Emily burst into tears, not graceful tears, but angry, jagged sobs that echoed through the hall. She screamed at me, "You've ruined everything. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you had to destroy it." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her and said, I didn't ruin anything. You and our parents did that the moment you decided my future didn't matter. That silence, after my words, was heavier than any shout. It was the silence of realization settling over everyone present. Daniel's mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This wedding should not continue under these circumstances, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. She glanced at Emily with something close to disgust. Our family will not be part of this deception. Daniel turned to Emily, his face pale. I need time to think, he said flatly. He stepped away from her, ignoring her pleas, and walked toward his parents. Emily's screams followed him. No, you can't leave me like this. Don't you dare walk away. But he didn't look back, and my parents stood frozen, their reputations unraveling in front of the very people they had tried so hard to impress. The looks of admiration they once commanded had curdled into whispers of judgment, pity, and scorn. And in that moment, I saw it, the power shift. For the first time, my parents weren't in control. Emily wasn't in control. Their empire of favoritism, built on lies and betrayal, was crumbling before their eyes. And I hadn't needed to scream, or lie, or scheme. All I had done was shine a light on the truth they tried so hard to bury. The downfall had begun, and there was no stopping it now. The ballroom had transformed into something unrecognizable. Where there had once been laughter and applause, now there was only chaos. Guests whispered in tight circles, their eyes darting toward my parents and Emily with thinly veiled judgment. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every word, every movement feel amplified. Emily, once the flawless bride, stood at the center of it all. Her mascara streaked, her gown rumpled, her voice shrill as she tried to regain control. She clutched Daniel's sleeve, desperate to pull him back into her orbit, but he shook her off. His expression wasn't just cold. It was disgusted. Was it true? He demanded one final time, his voice echoing across the ballroom. Emily hesitated. That hesitation was all it took. Daniel's father stepped forward, the document in his hand. This is more than true, he said firmly, addressing the crowd. It's documented. Your family stole from your own daughter to give to another, and now you've paraded it as though it were a badge of honor. A murmur of outrage rippled through the guests. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others simply gathered their things, unwilling to be part of the spectacle any longer. Emily broke then. She turned on me with venom, her voice rising above the noise. You did this. You couldn't stand that it was my day, my wedding, my moment. You ruined it out of spite. Her words rang sharp, but they carried no weight. No one believed her anymore. The evidence was too clear, her arrogance too naked. I stood tall, my voice calm but resolute. No, Emily, I didn't ruin your wedding. You and Mom and Dad did, the moment you decided I didn't matter. All I did was give everyone else the chance to see the truth for themselves. And that was the moment. I'll never forget the look on her face. The exact second she realized she couldn't spin it, couldn't charm her way out, couldn't lean on our parents to silence me. Her empire of favoritism collapsed under the weight of her own entitlement, and for once in her life, she was powerless. Daniel's mother turned sharply, her voice clipped and icy. We're done here. She beckoned to her son, who followed without another word. The sight of Daniel walking away from his own wedding, leaving Emily behind in a puddle of tulle and tears, was the image burned deepest into my mind. Gasps followed them to the door. Guests began filing out, their murmurs blending into a chorus of condemnation. Some avoided eye contact with my parents. Others glared openly, and then there were the vendors. The caterer approached my father, stern-faced, demanding immediate payment. The florist followed, the photographer too. All those bills, all those extravagant displays of wealth, suddenly crashing down when the financial illusion was exposed. My parents, who had spent years pretending money flowed endlessly, now stood red-faced and scrambling. Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing, her wedding gown pooling around her like a broken crown. My mother knelt beside her, whispering frantic consolations, while my father barked orders at no one in particular. I stood quietly off to the side, watching. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I simply let it unfold, the justice of it washing over me like cool water after years of fire. For once, I wasn't the empty chair. I wasn't invisible. I was the one who had shifted the entire balance of power with nothing more than the truth. And as the last of the guests trickled out, leaving the ballroom half empty and echoing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. In the weeks that followed, the ripples of that night spread far wider than I could have imagined. What happened at the wedding didn't just end Emily's big day. It became the defining story of my family's reputation. Word traveled fast. Friends, relatives, even neighbors who hadn't been at the reception soon knew what had happened. That my parents had stolen their own daughter's inheritance to prop up the other, and that it had all come crashing down in front of everyone. For Emily, the fallout was swift and brutal. Daniel broke off the engagement within days. His family wanted nothing to do with ours, and they made it clear why. No respectable family would tie themselves to people who treated their children like pawns. Emily's dream wedding turned into a nightmare headline, and the pity she once basked in turned into whispers of ridicule. Everywhere she went, people looked at her differently, not as the glowing bride-to-be, but as the woman whose family's greed had destroyed her future. My parents didn't escape unscathed either. Their social circle shrank almost overnight. People who once clung to their every word suddenly kept their distance. They were no longer the picture of respectable, responsible parenting. They were liars, thieves, and the very community they'd worked so hard to impress now saw them with disgust. Financially, things crumbled too. Without Daniel's family helping to cover the extravagant costs, they were left with enormous bills from the wedding. The caterers demanded payment, the venue held them to their contract, and the debt piled up. The very money they had stolen to elevate Emily was swallowed by the ruins of the wedding they had tried to make flawless. It was karmic justice in its purest form. And as for me, my life, for the first time, began to feel like it was my own. In the days after the wedding, relatives I hadn't heard from in years reached out to me. Some admitted they had suspected favoritism but hadn't realized the extent. Others offered support, small gestures at first, but meaningful ones. A cousin offered me a spare room to rent at a low price. An aunt sent me money, saying, "This is what your grandmother would have wanted you to have." The attorney who had given me the documents even offered to help me pursue legal action to reclaim what had been taken. For the first time, I had options, real ones. Build not on crumbs but on the truth and the courage to act on it. But more than the practical changes, it was the emotional shift that mattered most. I no longer carried the same desperate hunger for my parents' approval. I no longer measured my worth against Emily's pedestal, because I had seen it crumble. I had watched as the very foundation of their favoritism collapsed under the weight of its own lies. And in that collapse, I found freedom. Do I wish things had been different? That my parents had loved me equally? That Emily had been a sister instead of a rival? Of course, but I've learned that wishing for a different past is a trap. The only thing I can control is the way I move forward. Now, when I look back, I don't see myself as the forgotten daughter, the empty chair at the table. I see myself as the one who survived, the one who stood up and refused to be invisible any longer. The moral is simple. You can build your world on lies, favoritism, and stolen treasures, but eventually the truth will surface. And when it does, no amount of wealth or prestige can shield you from the fallout. Emily lost her wedding. My parents lost their reputation. And I found my voice. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.